Welcome back to the Art of Non-Discrimination podcast. In this episode, I want to talk pretty briefly about understanding others' opinions. Now, we can start with the idea of truth, and there are many ways to describe and define truth. One of those ways that we often end up defining truth is around group or majority view, and we don't know that. So when people say conventional truth, they often mean what is the majority view held by most people. There are reasons to be absolutely skeptical of this sort of view as truth. There is no reason to think, and even the great a student of the mind, Vasubandhu, has said that we can have what's called mass hallucinations. That intersubjective agreement is in no way needed for truth. It doesn't mean that if people agree on something, that it's automatically not true. It just means that it doesn't make it true. That is not a component of truth. That is not required for truth. And so Zopa Rinpoche said that, and he said it rather as a provocation, is the way I interpret it. He said, if everyone in the world believes it, then it's not Dharma. And Dharma, you could interpret that as truth. And if many people in the world do not believe it, there's a chance it might be Dharma. Now, of course, he's being provocative, I think. And it's just to loosen up our idea of what is truth. So often we confuse everyone else's opinions around us as truth. And it even can become worse than that. We have a imagination about the convention or the majority opinion, and we take that to be truth. So first of all, the convention is very easy to take apart. Not only is it not in any way an establishment of truth, it is an establishment of agreement. And agreement itself is not truth. So that's the first thing to recognize. So if everyone agrees that you are a bad writer, and that's an intrinsic quality, such that you don't have a chance in the writing industry, let's say many critics told you this, you could say that is the truth. Okay. We can start there. And you might think, well, I never really think of truth this way. Truth to me is defined within myself. But you have to look at yourself very closely. Look at the mind really closely. When it gets dressed every day and prepares itself for the day, who is it preparing for? And when you're working and you're trying to understand if your work is good or not, what truth are you relying on? Is it other people's? If 6 people from your job that are close to you tell you that you can't be a writer, you're not talented enough, and 3 people tell you that you are, which ones should you believe? Which group should you believe? So the problem with intersubjective agreement being truth is that it's unreliable. Meaning that one, again, it's no indication of truth, although it is an indication of some agreement. And then the other thing to think about it is there's way more than one conventional truth. So anyone who uses conventional truth as an argument, you have to be careful to note if they're using the idea of conventional truth as a way to establish their own truth. Because conventional truth is actually plural. So I've done a lot of data science, I've done a lot of research, um, and looked at the way people respond to questions. And it's very rare to get a majority view that is so dominant. It's very rare, actually. Um, in fact, diversity is the constant. You ask people their gender, and if you give them two options, the data will look as if there is a majority view. You give them a text box and you try to allow them to type open-ended, and you try to then you get a wider spread. You allow that diversity back in, and then there's many people who won't even describe their opinion. So the basic point here is that conventional truth is a plural. Whose conventional truth? That is the required question. To be intellectually honest is, in this case, is to say whose conventional truth? Your conventional truth? My conventional truth? And you might say different cultures have different conventional truth, but I can assure you that within each culture, you will see that they also don't have a like normative behaviors in other cultures. We talk about that in things like anthropology, sociology. It doesn't work as if the whole group does that. There's usually just as much variation within a group as there is between a group. So because of that, truth is highly unreliable when relying on the opinions of other people. So you have this plurality, this diversity of opinions, and they have different probabilities, right? Or they have different intensities. So if people say about what diet one should have, you would get numerous opinions. And you might get a majority opinion for one of them. But who's to say that that is truth? You have to really question your mind. We often make the mistake of thinking of truth as intersubjective agreement. It's not saying that any intersubjective agreement is not truth. It is saying that intersubjective agreement does not have to be necessarily related to truth at all. And so one of the things that I see in other people, that they're often shackled by the opinions of others. They often lead their lives in full consideration of how others may criticize or praise them. Now, it's not to say that you should not think about how others think of you at all. That would be maybe slightly too radical. But it's to say that this area is worth experimenting with. So if you have this, if you cling to the opinions of others as truth, if you say to yourself, am I a pretty person, and that is determined by other people, if that is your version of truth, you are going to find yourself suffering indeed, because not only is it incorrect, but it also leads us to believing that what we need to do is please other people. And that's not it, actually. And most of the spiritual traditions show us that the world is upside down, right? That in Buddhism and in, let's say, some non-dual traditions and some sects of Hinduism point out that people are attached to pleasure and pain. And if you go to the Lojong teachings in Tibet, they make pain a kind of something that one should almost seek out, or if it's available to you, to transform, to transmute. a lot of the Vajrayana path has this idea of transmutation. We see when we look at um, monkey populations and we look at ideas of resilience, we see that suffering is a requirement, um, and we also see that we live that statement of trying to get the most comfortable um, um, setting or environment has led to devastating effects. Capitalism is a part of that. Not that it's bad, intrinsically bad, but so this is worth teasing out. This is worth experimenting with. Do the opinions of others matter more than overcoming your own biases, pain in your life, how you suffer, the cyclic patterns you have? Do other people's opinions matter more than finding out how you can actually rid yourself of this, to transcend this? It's a very serious inquiry. We can also play with it. So yeah, to really think about that. And so again, intersubjective agreement, or agreement amongst many people, and this is almost, it never happens in large groups where everyone has agreed, but let's say a majority opinion is not equal to truth, is equal to agreement, majority agreement. And if you look into the distribution of opinions, you will see a wide variety supported, even if the relationship is a kind of power law where or where most of the answers may stack up to the first one or three options, and then the rest of them. But there's still people there that have those opinions. And so wisdom comes through suffering. And that's an idea from traditions. Whereas the world, or part of the buy-in to capitalism, is that if one is rich, one doesn't have to suffer. And that's a kind of form of a good life. So we have to be really inquisitive and challenge ourselves. That are we so sure that other people's opinions matter as much as they do to us? So really challenge yourself. I've met tons of colleagues and people I've met over the years who, myself included, I used to suffer terribly from trying to gain praise and avoid criticism. This is one of the 8 worldly winds. One of the pairs of the worldly winds is praise and criticism. And when you're seeking, when you become hungry for truth, it becomes very clear that other people's opinions matter very little in your search for truth, because you are a individual. Your consciousness on a regular basis, especially when ego is present, cannot be shared. No one can experience the world as you do. You are utterly unique. And to understand that is to understand that you must arrive at truth through your own conscious experience. And so that means taking the opinion of others seriously, unskeptically, is a mistake, a crucial mistake, because the nature of being is to the nature of the ego is to become small, to cut off the boundlessness of being. And the nature of being in this way is to reach for boundlessness. And that is, in a sense, a search for truth. And so when we are on the road to truth, if someone gives us a proposition, you shouldn't go this way because of that, or this, or that. And perhaps they are correct. But what we have known is what you cannot pass down very well is the direct experience of pain or going down a path, of finding out for yourself. Somehow we are beings that have the flexibility, the plasticity to experience things ourselves and not totally be robots, right? Because what if we can take all of the rules? Like evolution decided to give us a great amount of plasticity, degrees of freedom to experience it ourselves and make decisions on the fly, spontaneously. Why would it do that? Hasn't the span of evolution been enough so that we could just have a set of rules to live this life by? Why wasn't that just hardwired in? But instead, evolution has somehow developed many beings that have the flexibility and metacognition and consciousness to experience the world in a totally unique way and to spontaneously make decisions. Why have we been given that flexibility? So then to take up a convention unskeptically, uncritically, is to disparage your own inner ability, the nature, original nature of mind. So, going into that, we have this space of consciousness. It's such a strange thing, right? So, when we look at, we have some of these, what some people like to term as innate responses, primal responses. And those are changeable. So if you took it as a biological convention, that when you see a spider, or that let's say a majority of people see spiders or certain things, blood, or they have a reaction that it predates their own learning of it through conscious experience. Meaning the baby doesn't really know the concept of blood or sharp teeth, but yet there is some innate machinery that seems to give us biological conventions. And yet that same dog, let's say we're looking at a dog that's growling, and the baby can somehow pick up that this is not good. That can be changed. That can be shifted through different conditioning, through reappropriating the label. To re-examining this base of sharp teeth and all those attributes that we see and relabeling. So much so that we can have dogs as companions, really large dogs with really large canines, and we can have them as a companion. So this is our ability. It's finding out the truth of things for ourselves. And so in the same way, we should not take the opinion of others as the truth of our lives. When I first started seeking, really looking for truth, I felt the abandoning, the opinions of others, the importance of that begin to drop away. And my skepticism also rose, because I realized that actually, again, the biggest inequality in the world is between ignorance and non-ignorance, or liberation and non-liberation, or attachment and non-attachment. And then I realized that actually most people are really folded into this convention. And I started to see how unreliable my own mind was. And then how could I then rely on other people's minds who may not even think that their minds are unreliable? And so it's not that I consider people to be, um, their opinions don't matter at all. They do. But I take them um, as a grain of sand. For me, I have to experience these things for myself. It's like with a lot of TV programs, or if you've ever been a parent and you tell your kid over and over, do not do drugs, and somehow that can, for some of the children, breed a certain curiosity, an increased curiosity, and that is our need to find out for ourselves. Right. So our job is to find out for ourselves. We can take a convention and actually use that as a way of finding out for ourselves if that convention is of value to us in a certain time. Like food, I was told not to eat raw food because it'd be really bad for my stomach and it tastes gross, and we can't do that. And then I thought, well, I'm not so sure that our mind isn't deluding us. Not that you should eat raw food, but it's just this experimentation, this willingness to find out for ourselves. And then the other thing is that a lot of us don't feel at home in the world unless the people around us have somehow agreed that we're doing all right. That our mom thinks that we're doing well, we've got a good job, we've got a good education. Um, we're utterly riddled, some of us, with anxiety about what other people think of us, and we make decisions based on that. I'm going to be a finance major, even though I don't have no interest in finance, but I have to get a job that is respectable and my friends will approve. And we have to be very skeptical of this. Maybe we've already done that, and at some point for me, my on my path of going through conventions, the truth became more important than inhabiting a life that most of my friends and loved ones accepted. And so when you go on this path, the journey is more or less easy depending on how sensitive you are to that idea of truth being held by others. I can give you another example, which is you might see me as a gender, and let's say you see me as a male. I know from my experience with emptiness before I even knew the term emptiness that you are looking at me from your mind, that I'm coming from your mind, that when you look at me, I'm not coming from me particularly. I'm coming from your mind. And the label that you impute on me is coming from your mind. Realize that. And when you realize that, you realize that you are actually free of notions. And that all notions come from you putting notions on yourself and others putting notions on you. Now you might say, well, that affects me. Of course, these all have causal effects. All of our fantasies, all of our labels have causal effects. But you do not need to let it disturb the mind. Someone may label you. You should realize that if you haven't already, you are going to be labeled with a diversity of negative labels, positive labels. And I shouldn't say the labels are negative or positive. Labels that are imbued with negativity or positivity by the mind that is taking you in. And that's life. Totally accept it. I don't see myself as a gender. I don't imagine I ever will. I feel much too. I don't feel any somatic marker that tells me that. I don't see myself as a race. I wouldn't identify as a race. When I was in foster care, I used to sign the race of whatever family I was in. A very loose idea of that. Even though people may impute that on me, I understand, not just conceptually, directly, that they experience that from their own mind, that I don't exist. Meaning, I don't exist as this separate self, that by myself I would have all these attributes. I exist conditioned on my mind, conditioned on others' minds, and I have no way of controlling the other minds. So why would I work to control them if it doesn't lead to me suffering less? See, there's a little gamut. We actually believe if we can control other people's thoughts, we can control and modulate our own pain. Pay attention to this. If we control other people's thoughts, we think, what they think of us, we can make sure that we get more praise, more fame, right? More pleasure, more success, and get those are the positive or the four worldly wins that we cling on to, that we attach ourselves to, and we can avoid criticism or blame. We can avoid pain. We can avoid failure, and we can avoid disrepute, right? Our reputation being smattered. We're totally, and it seems subtle at first, but the game becomes really, really vicious fast, because then we're doing this impression management all over the place. We're managing our impressions. We have all these projections of, if we do this, they're going to look at me like this, and if I do that, they're going to look at me like this. I remember the first day I wore robes to work. My friend at the time was like, "Are you going to wear that to work?" And I could feel that they were having more of a negative response about it. And it's because all of our lives are somewhat based on these worldly whims, and we get stuck in them. And our whole life becomes circled around staying away from those painful feelings of hate and blame and criticism and disrepute and failure, avoiding it as much as possible. So we try to create this cave of our world, and we try to make that our truth, the truth of a good life. And it's a complete lie. And the reason I have to call it a lie is to provoke you to really consider, if you're so sure that by avoiding the four worldly winds and being attached to the other four, that you found truth in this life. Is that your version of truth? And I know, this is my assertion, that there is something in you that strives to be boundless, strives to be notionless. And I should say this maybe a little bit more correct. There is something in you that is boundless and notionless. And it's waiting to be rediscovered. And instead, what we're doing is we're living through the eyes of others. And we can feel that. Some of us, I'm sure, can feel that. We can feel that tension, that kind of boxed inness, almost as if you're in this cage. And all these eyes are on you, and you're reacting to the eyes. This is like a show. And this is not truth. It's not a deep enough understanding of truth. And so how can we unlock ourselves from this? And so part of it is realizing the hallucination, realizing that we're putting our truth, our values, in the hands of others who may be just as confused or more confused. And that realizing, and this takes time to realize as we meditate, as we contemplate, that we actually don't need praise nor blame, that we don't need to be attached or averse to either of those, that we can take praise and it kind of bounces off of us because we understand that that being is coming from their own side. I mean, from they're using their mind to impute that onto us as an attribute, and knowing that we are attributeless, that isn't so. Rather, it's truth, rather it's praise or blame. So maybe you can sit with that and really consider, when you strive for truth, is it caught up in other people's opinions of what is truth? Can we, as we reveal that to ourselves, can we realize and sit with the kind of mental attacks that we undergo when we are imagining what other people are imagining? Timothy Morton put it as, and I'm kind of paraphrasing, we're imagining his idea of her idea of their idea of good. And there's so much assumption built into that. There's almost a subtle arrogance about the way we really think we know what other people think. We really know which of those people is right and which of those people is wrong. So truth is yet to be discovered, but it's right in front of us. And so I would encourage you to look for truth beyond convention, beyond conditioning, beyond what the majority of people told you. And it will open up your world. And it can be terrifying for some to have that, because then it becomes a void of truth, right? It can become that. But for me, it opened up my world so much that I could experiment with anything, almost anything. That I'd be willing to try things that go against convention because I'm more interested in truth. So if you're going to be a slave to something, don't be a slave to other people's opinions. Be a slave to finding truth. And of course, you'll even have to give that up. But just starting there to shift away from believing that everyone's opinion of you is what matters in life, and that's how you are of value, that is your truth. It is not. I can tell you the truth, but you won't get it until you experience it. You are absolutely boundless and therefore complete, and therefore not needing a single thing. And that you can just sit here. When you realize that, you can just sit here and be content. Even though others may say, well, what are we doing? Can we go do something? I need to go and do this, or maybe I need to go and shop, and maybe I have to go and look good, or I have to go and do all these things for other people. And maybe you can just sit for yourself. Well, that's the end of this episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Art of Non-Discrimination, and I will see you next time.